Star Wars The Last Jedi was the most disappointing thing since my son. I am now going to spend the next hour and 40 minutes explaining why every Star Wars movie that isn't in the original trilogy is terrible and flawed. Because I think the original trilogy is perfect, and I'll never acknowledge any of the flaws it has, ever.
Okay, I'm not going to do my terrible Mr. Plinkin impression for the whole video. This is going to be a mega spoiler-filled review for all 8 episodic Star Wars movies. You have been warned. Before I get into my thoughts on The Last Jedi, I'll briefly cover all the episodic Star Wars movies. I've seen episodes 1 through 6 literally more than 30 times each, so I think it's safe to say I'm enough of a Star Wars fan that I know what I'm talking about. Episode 1. Not only was this my introduction to Star Wars, this was one of the first movies I ever saw in a theater. Out of all the Star Wars movies, this one is my least favorite. It's boring, the acting is stilted, the CGI hasn't aged all that well, and the dialogue is atrocious. I don't completely hate this movie. It has some entertainment value, but whenever I'd marathon the Star Wars movies when I was younger, this was the one I'd usually skip. Episode 2. This one is probably the most boring. No joke, Bella and Edward's romance in Twilight was better than Anakin and Padme's. Although this one is slightly objectively worse than Episode 1, I personally enjoy it more, mostly for nostalgic reasons. Episode 3. While still very flawed, Episode 3 is a massive improvement over Episodes 1 and 2. The CGI holds up much better than 1 and 2, and it's the only truly necessary prequel in my opinion. Episode 4. A New Hope is not a perfect movie. There are many flaws, unintentionally funny moments, and awkward acting in this movie. Considering the production hell this movie went through, it's kind of a miracle it came out as well as it did. Don't get me wrong, I still love it. It's a classic sci-fi adventure fantasy film, and it's basically a perfect example of the hero's journey. Trying to put myself in the mindset of someone who never heard of Star Wars before in 1977, I guess I could see why it became such a cultural phenomenon. Episode 5. In my opinion, this is the best Star Wars movie. It has the best story, best directing, best acting. Even when I scrutinize this film and try to nitpick it, there's only like 8 or 9 tiny things I can think of. Every aspect of storytelling and filmmaking reaches its pinnacle at this point in the series, and it's the only Star Wars film I'd consider giving a full-on 10 out of 10. Episode 6. I'm a bit more lenient on this movie than some. Don't get me wrong, that whole act in Jabba's palace could have been shortened to like 10 or 15 minutes, and the Ewoks are a strange creative choice, but the core of this film is definitely the scenes of Luke, Vader, and Palpatine on the Death Star. I'll get more into this later. In short, those scenes, in my opinion, are so well done that I'm willing to forget about a lot of the film's other flaws. Episode 7. I like The Force Awakens. I don't love it, and I don't hate it either. It's not amazing, but it's solid. I think this movie gets an unnecessary amount of hate, like, yes, it did hit many of the same plot points as A New Hope, and believe me, I noticed them too, but I found myself enjoying the new characters even more than the original cast, and I thought Kylo Ren was a great, interesting character. If anything, I wish they had explored his character even more. Despite its recycled plot, I can forgive that since this is the first Disney Star Wars film, and I feel that they copied so much to prove that they can do Star Wars. Okay, Disney, you can do Star Wars, but please make The Last Jedi more original. I gave you a pass on The Force Awakens, but I swear if Episode 8 is a direct ripoff of Empire Strikes Back, I am showing no mercy. Now on to Episode 8. Look, I went into this movie completely blind. I intentionally didn't watch any trailers or read or watch any reviews so I could go into this film with absolutely no expectations clouding my mind and to give it as fair a chance as possible. Even writing this script, I didn't look up any other reviews. So, what did I think of it? Well, thankfully the film does not borrow from the original trilogy anywhere near as much as The Force Awakens did. The only big plot similarities I noticed were, like The Empire Strikes Back, our main protagonist spends the first half of the movie training on an isolated planet with a retired master. Our other group of heroes spend a good chunk of the movie being chased by the Empire, and there's a battle on an ice planet. There's one scene that's set up similarly to a scene from Return of the Jedi, where Kylo brings Rey to Supreme Leader Snoke, and you think it's going to go down in a very similar fashion to Return of the Jedi. But surprisingly, things go a different route. We even get to see the Red Imperial Guards in action. Remember those Red Imperial Guards from Episode 6 who just stood there and didn't do anything? Well, now we finally get to see them kick some ass for once. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the beginning of the movie. First of all, in the opening crawl, how come various words are all caps? The opening scene is the only part of the film where humor feels forced at all. I never got the appeal of Poe. He's a pretty bland character and I never cared much for him. In the opening attack, the Resistance has these ships that drop conventional bombs like it's World War II. I'm sorry, but that wouldn't work since there's no gravity in space. Why couldn't they, fire missiles or something? The conventional bombing concept could have worked if they were in the upper atmosphere like the opening battle of Revenge of the Sith, but we don't get that impression because in Revenge of the Sith, they at least accounted for this by putting smoke trails and burning effects on some of the ships. Yeah, that's right. I just positively compared a prequel to a non-prequel. Fight me. Also, I don't know if it was the screen I saw it on or what, but the digital effects in Revenge of the Sith look better than The Last Jedi, and Revenge of the Sith was released 12 years ago. CGI Ghost Yoda makes an appearance in this film. In some shots he looks fine, but in others, particularly the first one we see him in, he looks jarringly horrendous. I don't really like the way this film was directed. Say what you want about J.J. Abrams, but he's at least a director with a vision and unique enough style, and he made it fit in with the Star Wars universe pretty well. The Last Jedi almost reminds me of a Marvel movie at times. I didn't care much for Finn and Rose's relationship, and the casino planet they visited was basically just a stylized, normal casino. Oh, and by the way, what's the deal with Leia getting sucked into space and then using the Force to fly back to the ship? What? I've been saying nothing but bad stuff so far, so you're probably thinking, "Aw man, this guy's gonna hate this movie." Well, no, there's a lot of stuff I like too. I really like how this film utilized and explored the concept of Force telepathy. It even explores an idea I've never thought of before, Force apparition. The fan service was kept to a minimum, which I was extremely grateful for. I kind of like how Snoke was kind of unceremoniously axed off. I wasn't expecting it since you're kind of expecting this guy to be the next Darth Sidious, but nah, boom, dead. Now I'm kind of curious to see where episode 9 is going to take us. I don't know about you, but unlike most mainstream audiences, I don't like my movies being too predictable. Uncertainty is what keeps me invested, and thankfully this movie had enough subversions of expectations to keep me interested, and The Last Jedi deviates enough from the original trilogy that it doesn't feel recycled. Despite the 150-minute runtime, making this the longest Star Wars film to date, The 2.5 hours absolutely flew by and felt like nothing. If anything, the movie is definitely entertaining. Anyone who says they were bored in this movie is either lying or has severe ADD. My biggest problem with this sequel trilogy is mostly subjective. It's that they just feel plain unnecessary. Like, episodes 1 through 6 are self contained in my mind, and there's no need to go beyond the Return of the Jedi. From the beginning, George Lucas's first draft of the Star Wars script was a story about Darth Vader. Essentially, it was about a prodigy warrior who becomes evil, and eventually his son makes him see the error of his ways and he turns good again. Listening to the audio commentary on the DVDs of the Star Wars movies, George flat out says that the story of Star Wars is supposed to be the story of Darth Vader. Return of the Jedi definitely has its flaws, but in my opinion, the last 20 minutes of the movie are basically perfect. I believe these scenes on the Death Star are the core of what the entire Star Wars saga is all about. When you watch just the original trilogy, you may think the saga is about Luke, but if you watch all 6 movies, you'll find that it's actually about Darth Vader. The original poster of Return of the Jedi had Luke wielding a red lightsaber and Vader with a blue one. Although they later switched it, I think this choice was appropriate since Luke was tempted by the dark side and Vader finds the light again. I'm by no means a film analyst or symbologist or whatever, and the thematic interpretations of film can vary widely from person to person, but here's what I get out of it. In the Emperor's chambers on the Death Star, there are 3 characters. Vader, the one who is truly being tested, Luke, the call to do what is good, and Palpatine, the temptation to turn away from good. The chamber is black. Outside the window is the blackness of space. All 3 characters are dressed in black, reflecting how empty and isolated evil or sin, or however you want to interpret it, makes someone. Luke momentarily gives in to his anger, severing Vader's arm and revealing that he also has a bionic hand, the same injury Luke has, both of which were inflicted by dark side tendencies of the other. Luke immediately realizes that he momentarily gave into the same anger that destroyed his father's body, so he rejects Palpatine's offer to join him. Palpatine, infuriated that he spent the last 6 movies trying to find a worthy successor but keeps failing, decides to torture and kill Luke by electrocuting him. Vader watches from the sidelines, torn. His mentor from age 9 and master from age 22, who he's devoted himself to basically his whole life, is destroying before his very eyes his only chance at redemption. It's at this moment where Vader realizes that Palpatine, symbolically representing temptation, sin, evil, and all that stuff, has been the villain all along. If you had to choose the main villain of the Star Wars saga, it's not Vader, it's Palpatine. He's responsible for the fall of the Republic, extermination of 99.99% of the Jedi, and severely damaging Vader's body and soul. Vader ultimately chooses to do the right thing. He saves Luke by picking up the Emperor and killing him the only way all great villains should die, being thrown into a bottomless pit. Luke, the symbolic force for good, has helped Vader redeem himself. This is made especially clear after Luke takes off Vader's helmet and says, "I've got to save you," to which Vader replies, "You already have." The Empire crumbles, and the status quo is reestablished, and there's really no reason for the saga to continue after that. The only reason I could logically see the Star Wars saga going on to Episode 9 is that fan theory about the sequel trilogy being about bringing balance to the Force is true. Amazingly, the idea of not embracing one side of the Force but both, and having balance, is toyed with a bit in The Last Jedi. I'm very curious to see what Episode 9 does with this idea. It makes sense since the Force is a dualistic concept, where good and evil cannot exist without each other, unlike most major religions where good can exist without evil, since evil is the lack of or rejection of objective good. I know I just went off on a big tangent and just kind of turned this review into a thematic analysis of the end of episode 6, so I'm going to wrap this up. The last thing I want to talk about is the ridiculous backlash the last 3 Star Wars films have gotten. Guys, calm down. For some reason, comment sections on any video talking about The Force Awakens, Rogue One, or The Last Jedi have to turn into shitstorms. Guys, shut up. The original trilogy was flawed too. They're not perfect. They're not the be-all and end-all of sci-fi fantasy adventure films. They were lightning in a bottle that will never be recaptured, so shut up. People are going to like or dislike whatever they please, and there's nothing you're going to do about it. A film is not automatically a 1 out of 10 movie just because the plot borrows heavily from another movie and has too much fan service. I liked The Last Jedi. I did not love it. I did not hate it. It was fairly solid. Not great, not excessively flawed, but solid. It was competently made and entertaining, but not groundbreaking. I think all the points I brought up in this review are fair, and I would consider my numerical score of a 6.5 out of 10 to a generous 7 out of 10 to be very fair as well. Keep in mind, I only saw the film once. With the exception of Rogue One, I've seen all new Star Wars films in the theater at least twice, and then a bunch more times on DVD. I'm writing this script opening day, right after seeing it for the first time, so I may pick up on more things after multiple viewings.